Okay, so welcome to this next episode of the HR and Leadership podcast. And again, today I'm joined by Gemma Board, Head of Talent, Learning and Development at Smurfit Westrock. So welcome, Gemma. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Thanks for joining us today. And as I said to you previously, the topic that we'd like to cover off today is how do you kind of manage talent in a competitive marketplace? And I'm aware, talking to a few of our clients about the key kind of words being bandied around at the moment, around like talent drain and kind of losing experience, losing knowledge when competitors seem to be a little bit more attractive and the grass appears to be a little bit greener, as it were. So, yeah, just really kind of keen to understand a little bit about your experiences and any advice and guidance that leaders, managers, HR professionals, employers could actually utilize.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people think the grass is greener, but sometimes it's not.
Indeed,
But I
yeah.
suppose, it's a, a really hot topic at the moment, isn't it? There's lots of businesses that are losing talent to competitors. And I mean, we certainly have seen that and do see that. And I think for us, it's kind of looking at what are your patterns. So who are you losing and why are you losing them? So what data do you have, whether that be from kind of exit interviews or from conversations that you're having with people? I think it's helpful to understand that at the point people are leaving, but in a way that's kind of too late, isn't it? Because something has made them look, or somebody has approached them and caught enough or generated enough interest for them to consider another opportunity. Because sometimes top talent will be looking for a reason for an alternative employer, but sometimes there's a knock on the door or a message on LinkedIn and it's just enough to kind of spike their interest to go into that conversation, and they can then be sold a dream or sold an opportunity that perhaps ticks a box that we're not ticking. So I think data is really important. Why are people leaving? Are there any kind of patterns within that you can start to address? And I think it is one of those topics, you can look at it kind of individual by individual, but it's sometimes sort of taken a step back and taken a bit of a strategic approach to it. Because ultimately for me, and I don't know if you agree, Lee, when you sort of said this was the topic, I was actually, it's really about engagement, isn't it? And how engaged people are throughout the employee life cycle with their employer. Because if you've got that, other opportunities, are not going to be as attractive, and you're not going to have that sort of talent drain that you spoke about.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And it's interesting you mentioned about the exit interview process, and that's an interesting topic just to delve into. I think some organisations I know don't even bother with the exit interview, and I think that's a massive missed opportunity in terms of learning what they could have done differently, what they could have done to retain that individual. And there might be a whole heap of reasons. But actually, we worked with an organisation a few years ago, the Rank organisation, and they kind of flipped that exit interview around, and they were asking us to come in and help them do stay interviews. So actually asking individuals within the organization, what is it that actually retains that person? What makes them stay with the organization?
Yeah.
And looking to leverage that and looking to leverage kind of the positives, as it were. So before they get to exit interview, before they're leaving, turning it around, actually exploring the reasons why people want to work for them and stay working with them, which I thought was very innovative and very kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea to do it that way around, isn't it? Because said at the start, I think an exit interview, like we do them, and we have recently kind of refreshed our process around that just to make sure that we are learning as an organisation from these experiences, particularly when they are, someone that was perhaps in our sort of talent pipeline and we had visions of them developing in a certain way with us in the future. So what about our approach has contributed to that decision? And there's usually something, right? So, it could be relationship with a line manager. It could be because they didn't understand the pathway. We weren't clear about it. It could be personal reasons. It could be anything, right? But I think understanding that at that point is really important if you take the lesson from it and learn from it. But like I said, it is too late at that point because they've already made a decision. there are examples in our business where people do leave and have left, and perhaps they then experience that the grass isn't greener. And perhaps the promise that was made to them actually doesn't come to fruition, and they come back. And we're open to that in most situations. If they were a good leaver, whatever one of those is, and it is talent that we would kind of welcome back into the business, and we have done that from time to time.
Yeah, and again, I see that in other organisations that people do kind of leave and have that realisation that actually maybe for the extra pound in the packet, to being asked to work harder than they ever used to, and maybe the grass isn't green as a result there, or the aspirations or the kind of promises that were dangled in front of them weren't actually coming to fruition. So yeah, that does happen. I guess for me, it's about that engagement word that you said before, though, learning from either the exit interview or the comments from potential leavers, and feeding that back to line managers, to HR, and then having a kind of strategy to kind of deal with that feedback. So I'm just curious, have you come across any kind of retention strategies? Are there things that you guys there apply currently or previously in previous careers that you come across?
So we kind of do flip it to a certain extent. And do we necessarily look at them as retention strategies? Probably not. We look about, are they engaging our people? So we, like many businesses, do kind of engagement surveys at different frequencies to assess how actively motivated are people. So would they recommend us as an employer? Are they themselves satisfied? Are they just kind of, sat within the organisation, but they're not, particularly engaged or disengaged? Or are they people that are actually kind of actively disengaged? And then we start to try and look at that from a sort of life cycle perspective. And, I think there are a few things that we do through different kind of stages of the employee life cycle, really, to kind of try and tap into that from a certain extent. Now, you mentioned previously, sometimes people leave for an extra pound. And I think, the salary compensation benefits package is always an interesting one, because it's often not going to be the thing long term that keeps people. A lot of the people that we speak to maybe feel like, as long as their package is competitive and they feel that it reflects their skills and their contributions, sometimes people are motivated. Everyone has their own individual motivations, don't they? And sometimes people will move for financial reasons. But often long term, you do find that, you might be excited when you get a bonus or a pay rise, but actually that can fade. The impact of that can fade pretty quickly. So I think as long as they're competitive and you review them and make sure they're sort of in line with market rates, or, depending on, where your business sits on these things. So, we try and keep current with that as much as we possibly can. But I think our focus then would more be around things like career pathways and career development. And, if we've got people that want to develop their career with us, some people don't. They want to come in, they want to do their job, they want to get their salary, go home, and fine. But there are some people in the business that want more than that and want to develop and progress. So I think it's about, trying to get to know people. And in a big organisation, that's difficult to do that on an individual level, which is, I think, where the role of the line manager really comes in, because, sort of working in HR, I can look kind of strategically at our patterns and, things we might be able to offer in terms of benefits packages or development programs and all these kind of things. But it's very personal, I think, motivation. And, I've worked in businesses where the salary wasn't very good at all. It was okay. It kind of paid the bills, but it didn't do much more than that for me, but it paid my mortgage at the time. The actual work I was doing probably wasn't that exciting, but what was exciting for me was actually the relationship I had with my line manager and the team that I worked in. There were way more attractive roles I probably could have gone off and done at that time, but I felt really loyal. I felt really committed. I felt like I had someone who was really invested in my development. So for me, that's what kept me motivated in that previous role, maybe for 10 years. But then things changed in the leadership of that organisation, and I actually felt I don't really align with the values and the leadership style which is now there. So actually I've got a choice. I can stay I can stay and maybe moan for the next 20 years, but actually I've got a choice, and there are, finding something which is more aligned to what I want to do in the long term, and, our values align is kind of the way to go, really. So, I think it's very individual, this subject of kind of what keeps us engaged. You can look at typical things for groups of people, which is something that we've, started to develop, almost like some personas from like a marketing perspective. So typically what is attractive to people of this age group and this demographic, and then what can we do for that particular group. But I do think as much as you can do those things, the role of the line manager is so key.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. I think it's interesting you mentioned about some people are tempted away because of the financials, and I'm sure in your organisation, as most organisations do, they tend to have a end of year employee benefit statement, which will normally just kind of outline what that person received in salary, what their pension contributions were, what their holiday entitlement was, which is fairly standard. But I know of a couple of organisations we've worked with in the past that were kind of uber conscious of people going away for that extra pound in the pocket, as it were, and not fully appreciating what they were fully getting from their employer.
Yeah.
So they started with their employee benefits package, in addition to the salary, the pension, holiday entitlement, etc., actually including a breakdown of the costs of the training that had been provided for them, the additional kind of development opportunities, and putting a financial cost to that as well. And actually, when that kind of appeared on the employee's statement, it actually equated in some cases for an extra £5,000, an extra £10,000, etc., that had been invested on that person's career development or personal progression, which they hadn't really accounted for. And I think that's a very good and quick and easy way for employers potentially to highlight that you do actually get more from us than just your salary and kind of your holidays. So I think you're right. It's about making them aware of what they're actually getting to help where possible with that engagement. And the difficulties you mentioned is about people are different, people have personal preferences and styles, etc. But from a HR department, from a manager's approach, it's kind of looking at where are the common areas that we can do things better, or we can educate better, or we can make them aware of why we should be the employer of their choice.
Yeah, and I think, the word that you used there, Lee, that really kind of stuck out to me was that investment. So like, pounds and pence in the back pocket or to spend on a holiday may be the same or may not be any different, but actually what are we as a business investing in you? And I think there are lots of things that, can almost be taken for granted, but like not all organizations provide them. And there's a cost to the business, but there's a value to the individual. Even things like, we've got an employee assistance program, for example, and people have access to counselling and legal support and financial support and all those kind of things. And there's a cost to us as a business for providing that. People don't necessarily see the cost. Sometimes they don't even need to use that service, but it's there for them and their families as and when they do need to use that. Now, again, EAPs, lots of organisations will have them, but again, not everybody has them. And, what's included in it will be different for, different groups of people. And I think, sometimes access to those things, again, depending maybe on your life cycle and the stage you're at, can be really, really important to you. And, perhaps earlier in your career, it's actually about the career development, the progression, that pathway. Maybe at certain times, actually, flexibility becomes more important to you. And then what can we do to support your family needs or your caring needs or, all those types of things. And I think having a leadership team which is investing in the people, whether that be financially or in their development or getting to know them as people, maybe you can put a value on it.
Yeah, and I think, and I know from your HR background, that actually losing people from your organisation and then subsequently having to go out and go through the recruitment process is very timely and costly to you as an organisation. So again, I feel there should be kind of an emphasis on stopping them going in the first place, so you don't have to incur that kind of recruitment chore, as it were. So you talked about the exit data and the kind of gleaning from that any tips and hints you can to keep people on board. But how much education is there for line managers around that engagement piece to consider their approach, their engagement, their style to help with that retention focus of talented people?
Yeah, so we have a leadership model called Open Leadership, which we rolled out, I'd say 10 years ago. It was quite a while ago. But that was based on lots of research within our organisation, based on successful leaders and what makes them successful, and kind of derive some competencies from that. So a lot of the leadership type training that we will do, or sort of development activity, will be kind of based on that framework. And one of the competency areas is about knowing yourself and embracing learning. So they are encouraged to do that. It's also about having that kind of authentic, genuine leadership style. But one of the parts of the model is about how do you engage and lead and support and motivate your team. So I guess set from the top of our organisation, that is there as something which is seen to be beneficial, and it is spoken about at a senior leadership level, which kind of naturally then filters down in the organisation. So we do lots of sort of development programs at lots of sort of stages of the leadership pipeline, if you like, and that engagement piece to focus on retention has become more and more prominent, certainly over the last 5 years. Maybe even longer than that, actually, because 5 years ago was COVID and we were definitely talking about it before that, but that has changed things, actually. So maybe the last sort of 7 to 8 years, we have really focused in on that topic. And we do try to kind of put metrics to some of the programs. So some of it is around, we have full sort of balanced scorecards and things, looking at turnover levels and things. So, we do try and put some metrics towards some of these programs and what we expect them to deliver for the business. Again, because they're expensive. They're a huge investment in people. And we want people to, learn and professionally develop, but also then use that information, particularly at leadership level, to support and improve the culture and the engagement of their team and their business. So, there is that expectation, like, we've given you this development, what are you going to do with it? And how can we, get the most value from that investment in you as an individual?
I think you're right. And as you alluded to earlier on, a lot of the reasons why people leave organizations tends to be the relationship with their manager. That can be a factor. So I guess managers and leaders are at the front line of that ability to retain people.
Yeah.
So the emphasis there is on their mindset around how keen are they to actually have that level of engagement and to genuinely have the employees' interests at heart and want to retain them for the organisation. I reflect on early in my career and previous managers, where some of the managers' kind of comments were, "Well, okay, yeah, if you want to go, that's your decision, go," or "Yeah, you can go, but you'll be back very soon," kind of thing. And there was never there was never really any kind of concerted effort or even skill set from the manager to actually engage with that person, understand their motivation, understand their career aspirations, and support, coach, and guide them, which probably would have actually retained me if that relationship was stronger. But I just wanted to focus on the fact that we talked about the pound in the pocket and why people sometimes go. Sometimes I'm aware that people feel there's no natural path for career progression, and that may be a driving factor for talented individuals leaving the organisation. Again, what's your experience of that, and how do you manage that when there appears to be a flat structure and people don't feel they can actually move up the lane, up the chain, as it were?
Yeah, that is something that we are talking a lot about this year and last year as well, because it is probably one of the more common reasons that we can lose talent, because they don't have visibility of the pathway, or sometimes the path isn't as quick or as short as they want it to be. And whilst I don't think people always leave for money or stay for money, obviously when you develop your career, usually your sort of comp and bends package going along with that changes at the same time. But, people have different drivers from it, really. But definitely the career development pathways thing is, I think, something we've got a real opportunity to shape and to influence. And, it's hard, isn't it? Because we have, in our business, there are some sort of typical routes that people can take. There are some kind of key feeder roles to kind of go up the leadership and management side of things. You know, some of what we find, and I've seen in other, you know, when I've worked in sort of healthcare organizations as well, typical things happen. You know, maybe become technically very good, but then is your only option then to go into leadership and management? And do you enjoy that? Because it's a very different role, isn't it, from fixing the problem, dealing with the customer, dealing with the patient, you know, making something, whatever it is that you're doing or producing or technically working on, to then leading and managing people that are doing that. And sometimes where I think pathways can get a bit tricky is that, you know, some people want to go into the leadership and management route. Some people actually just want to progress, but feel that's their only option. And actually then where they're spending their time and doing what they're doing, they're not enjoying that. They don't want to really be a leadership manager. They just want to progress, but that's the only option. So I think it's about, and I wouldn't say we've nailed this yet, looking at alternatives. So could we have some more specialist, functional, technical type roles that do offer that progression? But that's if you're looking at the kind of the linear progression, isn't it? Because I think you can also then look at, you know, job enrichment and project work and secondments and other opportunities which make somebody's role more fulfilling, which isn't necessarily this sort of linear, you know, typical historical ladder that we've all tried to climb.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, I know in some organizations that the talent programs for those on succession plans, for example, they deliberately put in place sideways moves so that individual gets a broader understanding of the organization. If you've been flagged as being a future senior manager, that broad understanding of all the different component departments of your organization is going to be so beneficial. So I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's not always about that linear kind of view on things. It's looking at where can I go to get a broader understanding, broader awareness, further develop my skill set, always with that eye of the future development. But again, some organizations, some people have that as a structured approach, and others it's kind of like hit and miss. But there's definite value in doing that, I feel.
Well, yeah, 100%. I mean, we, you know, we're starting to look more and more now around how do we give people, I mean, we're calling it planned experiences, but what we mean is, look, to get to this particular role, you need experience in this, this, and this, and you've got this part, you don't have this part. It's not necessarily a training course. It might be if there's a knowledge build or a skill build, but what experience can we give you to fill this gap so that when the next opportunity is available, which by the way, we think is going to be in 3 years' time, you've now got A, B, and C, and you're ready to go. So some of that for us is about, I mean, we're calling them gigs. So almost like a secondment, but we're very clear at the outset, like, you know, by going off and doing this project, it could be with other people or a team or whatever, but by going to do this, these are the skills, these are the experiences you're going to gain through doing this. We need people who've got these things. This is what this is going to go and give you. So now, you know, for the next 6 months, you'll be spending 1 day a week doing this part of the project. That really takes the line managers to be on board with that, because they then have to release their best talent potentially to go off and do this project, and
which they might not want to do.
Which they might not want to do. And again, one of the things we've been speaking a lot about recently is kind of talent hoarders. So like, you're in my team, you're my talent, I'm going to hide you and protect you. I'm not going to share you with the rest of the organization. You know, but people need that, particularly going back to that point where you might have, you know, flatter structures. Sometimes you need to give people experiences, you know, depending on the size of your organization, like in different business units. And I know one of our general managers spoke to some of our early career talents last year, and what she spoke about was that she has done what some people would be considered like 2 or 3 sideways moves. But what was important to her was that she could actually replicate her success in different business units with different people and different teams. So sometimes, again, it's just exploring what does that career pathway look like. So maybe you do a few at this level before you, you know, you kind of take that jump. But yeah, I think that broad brush experience in different areas of the business is important, and just encouraging, I guess, the mentality that it's the talent of the business, it's not Lee's talent.
Calling all HR professionals, leaders and managers, are you ready to take your workplace strategy to the next level? At 2Js, we get it. Managing people, driving engagement, and keeping up with ever-changing HR challenges isn't easy. But what if you had instant access to expert-led training, ready-to-use HR toolkits, and practical resources, all designed to make your job easier? From leadership development to conflict resolution, employee engagement to resilience training, we've got the solutions you need when you need them. And here's something just for you. Use discount code podcast25 at the checkout for 25% off all purchases at 2J's HR store. No more wasting time on outdated processes. Visit 2jshrstore.com today and claim your exclusive discount. Because great HR isn't just about policies, it's about people.
That is owned by so-and-so, or...
But that raises so many interesting questions
for the business, isn't it?
It's kind of looking at that individual that was looking to succeed in the different areas. If you manage to do that, how much kudos do you get from kind of being successful in multiple areas, and your credibility just kind of spikes as a result of that. You also mentioned about managers hoarding talent. I love that expression. But I guess I'm curious in terms of how do you prevent that? Who's overseeing that to stop that from happening? And I guess that kind of goes back to their managers' relationship with them, just checking about their teams and people to kind of prevent that activity going on.
I think that's a bit of a cultural thing, isn't it? Like, so do we... And I don't know the answer to this question. Do we reward and recognise people for developing talent in their team? Or do we just thank them when they've produced this ready for you operations manager, for example? What recognition do we give if if someone's really good at developing people and they're putting all this talent into the pipeline? You could have someone else here who's then vacuuming that and like, oh, I'll have all your talent, great. Do they give anything back? And then what's the... Like, do these people get rewarded for developing talent? Because...
I think that's a very interesting question that you've just raised there, because that fundamentally goes back to a lot of organizations' perceptions of the role of a manager. Is the role of the manager to oversee fundamentally the productivity, the customer's end product result timings, etc., or is the role of the manager about developing the resource, the employees for future progression, for future careers, etc.? And you could argue for both camps, but personally, I think it's a bit of a balance. But if it's a balance, it's about how are you recognizing that people development side of things, and what metrics are you putting in place? How are you supporting your managers to be able to do that, as you say, in terms of it being a key objective of theirs? And I do know some organizations that do set it as key objectives for their leaders to have that development quota, if you like.
Yeah, and I mean, leaders are busy, aren't they? They've got so many plates they're trying to juggle, and not to smash anything, while juggling all those plates. And I think, the tendency is the sort of, I'll say operational delivery, and I'm from manufacturing, but the delivery of the product to the customer, whatever that might be, is maybe the comfort zone, maybe it's the focus, maybe that's where people are measured. So you tend to do what you're measured on, don't you? But there is that argument that actually, if you're focusing on the resource and developing the resource, you actually don't need to be as concerned about the rest of that, because other people are dealing with that bit. So yeah, it is a challenge. And I think, the language we've started to use is actually about business sustainability. So actually, we are all responsible for developing talent in this organisation, because we want our business to be sustainable from a people perspective in the long term. So that's the kind of language that we're trying to use to get, to break down some sort of mentality around, well, this is talent from here and talent from here, and we've got them in these little pockets. Because, if everybody works on it, then really the whole business benefits, and that's what actually we belong to. So...
That's an interesting take because, as you say, sustainability, if you mention that in most organizations, they think about the green card and kind of how do you kind of keep operating as a business. But you're
Yeah,
absolutely right when you come to think about it in terms of the importance of having the right workforce, the right skill sets within your workforce to continue to operate as a business. So I think
yeah.
that's a really good take there. Just want to draw your attention back to what we were saying before about secondments, and you mentioned about kind of going on a sideways move or a different department or a project, etc. I'm aware that some organisations actually do secondments with their customers, and again, that obviously depends on the relationship you have with them. But yeah, I just wanted to explore kind of your experience of secondments out of the business, or even I'm aware that some organisations still allow sabbaticals and kind of giving people an opportunity to have a break from the workplace and go off exploring, traveling, or getting different experiences, which again enhance their skill set before they come back into the business. Any thoughts or experiences on either of those?
I mean, from a secondment perspective, we do quite a few secondments. I have done a couple of secondments, one of which I went to do some work in health and safety for a few months, which is really interesting, but looking at it from a kind of cultural perspective. So able to use my skills and develop my skills. But for me at that point, it was getting to understand businesses outside of the ones that I'd been focusing on. So there was a clear kind of reason for me doing that, and they got a benefit from the sort of project that came out of that. So yeah, we definitely kind of support secondments, and again, once it was done, I kind of returned back before doing something else eventually. So yeah, secondments we do use quite a bit, and I think they are great because it gives you a chance to experience something without the fear of what if I try it and I don't like it. Because when I was kind of offered the opportunity, I was like, oh, I'm not sure about that. But I was like, well, do you know what? My mindset is always like, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is I don't like it. I'll deal with it for 3 months and then I can go back. I've got my safety net. So it's a bit of a kind of try before you buy, to a
Yeah.
certain element. You're practicing your skills, you're developing. It's in a safe environment because it's within your organization. But you can then make different networks and different connections, and you're working with different managers, etc. So I think it gives you that opportunity to try a different role. And if you don't like it, you don't like it, you can go back. Whereas actually, if you're then applying for a role, either in your organization or a different organization in terms of, retaining talent, you're making a jump, aren't you? And you can't always just, I mean, sometimes you can, but you can't always just go back, or it's not as easy, is it? So I really encourage managers and colleagues to think about secondment or sort of project opportunities. So I just think it's such a great way of putting some skills into practice or having a different experience without the risk of taking another role. Sabbaticals, I would say we don't do as many. There's a handful of examples. But again, I know like from previous organisation that was a bigger thing that people did, and sometimes it would be going off to climb a mountain or do some work with a charity or just do something completely different for whatever reason, and then kind of coming back. So again, there's definitely sort of benefits to that if it's something the business can support, really. And it's better, any of those are better than somebody leaving your organization, because it then goes back to the skill loss, the cost, the recruitment, induction, getting back
Yeah.
to someone being as productive as the person that left. It's really hard to measure.
And I think you're right. I think that's the key thing, really, isn't it? Trying to avoid that worst case scenario where you do have that talented individual exit the business. So looking at different strategies, different approaches, be it the sabbatical, be it the secondment, be it the development plan, etc. There's a number of things that we've already talked about that could be explored. But I think ultimately on those last two, the secondment and the sabbatical, it's given them the opportunity to quote kind of Covey, sharpen their saw, as it were, to kind of come back with some different skills, some different awareness. And the key thing for me is the network that you mentioned there as well. That's often forgotten, about going into different departments, teams, organizations, and extending your network. Because again, the kind of cliched comment, your net worth is your network. It's about knowing people that can actually help you to achieve future successes. So I think all of those things are crucial, really. So I think there's a whole heap of things there that could be applied by leaders and managers and organizations and explored. But the key thing is just to acknowledge it. I think for me, that's where a lot of leaders, managers, and sometimes, unfortunately, organizations are almost oblivious to the talent being drained from their organization, and unfortunately spending money hand over fist for recruiting new individuals coming through. I appreciate it depends on the levels within the organization, but I think the first thing is really just acknowledging that we have talent and what are we doing to retain them, really.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you want to retain as much talent as you possibly can if it is kind of engaged and committed talent. I think there is always that balancing act, and no harm in bringing fresh talent into your organization as well, because if you have very, very low turnover, again, I've seen historically teams with very low turnover and they're then not very diverse. And I don't mean from kind of physical characteristics perspective in any way or an age way, but just they've been together as a team for so long that they've got into this kind of groupthink mentality and don't have any fresh or ideas or perspectives from outside. So I do think, we're talking about maintaining talented people, right? But there is that kind of balance between there is other talent which other organizations have developed and maybe they haven't looked after it that you could benefit from as well. So, we don't want to be spending too much on recruitment, but there is a benefit obviously from bringing new talent in. But then it's kind of going back to the point at the top of the podcast, really. We were talking about, the promises people make to you when you're, having that two-way interview kind of question, and what promise is the new employer making to you. So again, I think if you're bringing new talent in, then that is now your talent to retain and to motivate and develop and try and keep in the organization as well. Because again, if they've left somewhere fairly recently, we kind of have a key focus really on the first couple of years, because we tend to see that can be the time that people can leave because maybe they haven't aligned with the values, or they don't perhaps feel so committed. Maybe they're not so invested. So within the first 1 to 2 years, that's like a little pocket that we've done some focused work on, again, because they can be a group that they've moved once, so they know they can move, and if the promise, the grass isn't greener on our side, then maybe they look again.
Yeah, some great points there. And I think, again, it's an interesting one that you mentioned about the churn, which actually I hadn't really thought about, but you're absolutely right. It's kind of important to have some change at some stage within a team for the very reasons that you just mentioned. And I've experienced that in some of the organizations that we've connected with and worked with, that you've got individuals, the whole team has been there 20, 30 years, and they, as you quite rightly pointed out, had that group think. They're not as open to new ways of doing things, technology, different thought processes. So you do need that churn element there to bring about that kind of freshness, if you like, to thinking and kind of moving forward. So that's a very good point to kind of add in there. Gemma, I think that's some fantastic areas that we've covered already for people to kind of tap into, all the way back to understanding why people are leaving, using that data, that insights, getting the engagement right, thinking about what's the strategy to apply to retain people where appropriate. But also, if you just mentioned there, recognizing that churn to a degree is acceptable and actually welcome to bring fresh ideas in. But I guess from a HR and leaders point of view, it's just kind of managing those expectations, really. Any final comments that you'd offer as tips and advice for HR professionals or leaders to retain their talent?
Advice. I would say do what you can with your leaders to encourage them to get to know people's individual motivations. I know it's challenging when you get bigger teams and bigger organizations, but as much as you can kind of do strategically, I think you can't underplay that line manager relationship and their role, because they will then be able to feed you data and information that you can look at from a different level. But on a day-to-day person who influences your mood, who influences what you're working on, who influences the feedback that you get and how you feel about your day, ultimately it is your line manager. So for me, I think it is a focus area, and they're really busy people and they have lots going on, lots of plates to juggle. But I think just emphasising that side of the role and why spending time there can actually save them a lot of time in other areas of their jobs that they might be struggling with. So I think, yeah, short-term, long-term gains.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's a perfect way to actually end the podcast session now. Gemma, thank you very much for your insight and awareness there. Great nuggets there that people can take away and implement straight away. So very much appreciated, and hope again to see you on future podcasts sharing some of those fantastic insights. But for the time being, Gemma, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee. Take care.